Dear organizers of the European Stigma and Discrimination Forum 2022, dear all, I would like to thank the program chairs Professor Marc Nelson, Ms. Memory Sachi Konye and Dr. Vanessa Apea for inviting me to the European Stigma Discrimination Forum 2022. Unfortunately, due to other obligations, I'm not able to take part physically in this event, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to take the floor today through this video message. First of all, I would like to present myself. My name is Marc Angel. I'm a Luxembourgish member of the European Parliament for the Socialist and Democrat Group in the European Parliament since 2020, and I'm the co-chair of the LGBTI Intergroup. This is the biggest intergroup in the European Parliament, counting 156 members of the Parliament. They are not all LGBTI persons, but they are important allies. In my capacity as co-chair of the LGBT Intergroup, I have the honor to work closely with civil society and policymakers to improve EU laws to better protect our community. You're probably aware that last week 2 young Slovakians have been killed due to their sexual orientation. We have managed, with the involvement of most of our allies in the European Parliament, to get a debate in the plenary, but also a resolution condemning this horrible attack and calling for concrete actions, such as the inclusion of the hate crime and hate speech to the list of EU crimes, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, the unblocking without delay of the horizontal anti-discrimination directive, and finally the call for a rapid adoption of the so-called gender-based violence directive. This is an example of what we do as an intergroup in the European Parliament to promote and defend rights of all people in all their diversity. When it comes to HIV/AIDS, I've personally witnessed the impact of the AIDS pandemic on people and friends. I have experienced the barriers posed by human rights violations, stigma and discrimination and inequalities. I have also observed the positive contributions by civil society and community organizations being much closer to the realities faced by people living with, at risk of, and affected by HIV. And this is why I co-founded Stop AIDS Now Luxembourg earlier in my career. In the fight against HIV/AIDS, we have come a long way and we made a lot of progress. Yet, in my current capacity as a member of the European Parliament and co-president of the Intergroup on LGBTI rights, I am confronted with serious human rights violations within the European Union and beyond. We must step up genuine engagement and leadership of communities and inclusion of key populations. In 2019, funding for the HIV/AIDS response in low and middle income countries was 30% less than the the $26 billion which the UN member states committed to mobilize by 2020. And in the past decade, low and middle income countries increased their HIV domestic resource allocations by 52%, representing the main source of funding for the fight against HIV/AIDS. In the same period, the share of HIV/AIDS funding from other governments, except the United States of America, has decreased from 11% to 2%. Moreover, countries were insufficiently able to address the societal and structural barriers to enable an effective response. Falling short of the agreed commitments resulted in an additional 820,000 people dying from AIDS-related illnesses, an additional 3.5 million people acquiring HIV, requiring a lifelong antiretroviral treatment. One key lesson learned from the HIV/AIDS response is that investing too little and too late has a huge cost for humanity, with millions of additional people requiring services, straining often fragile healthcare systems and yielding more costly responses. The European Parliament, under the leadership of the Parliamentary Committee on Development, has been closely involved in this process through its resolution on accelerating progress and tackling inequalities towards ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. The resolution calls on the European Commission to address AIDS as a global public health crisis and accelerate all efforts to meet the 2025 targets, including through scaling up investments in UNAIDS and the global funds to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, among others. Inaction has a cost. Each year, the world fails to fully fund the HIV response, at least 360 billion, or lost because of the economic cost of homophobia due to stigma and discrimination, lost productivity due to avoidable AIDS deaths and lifetime costs of HIV treatments from avoidable new HIV infections. While adequate HIV/AIDS funding has become even more precarious in view of the earlier COVID-19 crisis and now the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the consequences of not investing in ending the AIDS pandemic are dire. We cannot allow for a worsening of the HIV pandemic. A second key lesson is that intersecting inequalities such as social, economic, racial and gender inequalities and restrictive social and legal environments continue to drive the HIV/AIDS pandemic. The people being left behind are those who disproportionately experience gender inequality, HIV-related stigma, social marginalization and criminalization. The third lesson on the centrality of a human rights-based approach to create an enabling environment for successful HIV/AIDS responses and affirm the dignity of people living with or vulnerable to HIV so that the world defeat AIDS by 2030. Despite being more than 40 years into the HIV/AIDS epidemic, continued human rights challenges, including stigma and discrimination, misuse of criminal law and punitive approaches, mandatory testing inequality, and violence against women and girls, and denial of sexual and reproductive health and rights remain among the main barriers to effective HIV/AIDS responses. For example, 60% of the countries that report to UNAIDS still criminalize HIV exposure, non-disclosure and transmission. 37% criminalize same-sex sexual relations, and 40 countries still retain restriction on entry and stay for people living with HIV. Also, stigma and discrimination remain major issues. More than 25% of people aged 15 to 49 years reported holding discriminatory attitudes towards people living with HIV, as shown by recent population-based survey data. It is for this reason that Luxembourg, my home country, a strategic partner of UNAIDS and a member of the UN Human Rights Council, has committed to join the global partnership for action to eliminate all forms of HIV-related stigma and discrimination as the first EU member states, and I hope all the others will follow. In my role as UNAIDS Red Ribbon leader for the 10-10-10 targets, I commit to utilizing my expertise, my experiences and networks to advance the achievement of the 10-10-10 targets within the European Union and EU partner countries in close collaboration with and under the guidance of UNAIDS. I'm excited to support both the Global Partnership Against HIV-related Stigma and Discrimination and the Education Plus initiative as critical vehicles and amazing opportunities for achieving the 10-10-10 targets. I wish to all of you a fruitful forum full of successes and good discussions. Thank you very much.